Some of them sold their countries out to Nazis, while others just tried to blow up the government. These are the aggrieved tales of history's most famous traitors. Vidkun Quisling was a Norwegian military officer and politician who sold his country out to the Nazis. A deeply anti-Semitic man, he founded his own version of the National Socialist Party in Norway before the Nazis even arrived. However, it turned out to be wildly unpopular. Unable to see any parliamentary success, Quisling resorted to asking the Nazis to invade during a trip to Germany in 1939. A year later, he got his wish, and he took the opportunity to declare himself the head of Norway's new government. The outrageous takeover was greeted with bombs and fires in Oslo laid by the disgruntled populace. In the weeks that followed, the Nazis organized a new government, and they awarded Quisling the title of Minister-President and allowed him a large amount of power. Under the new regime, he embarked on a hateful crusade that left deep scars on the country. He immediately banned Jewish people from entering Norway, had Norwegian Jews imprisoned in great numbers, and sent many to the Auschwitz concentration camp. After the war, Quisling was shot for his crimes in 1945 following a brief trial. Julius Rosenberg was a key member of a highly successful communist spy ring in the United States. Among other things, he helped infiltrate the Manhattan Project in the 1940s, passing on information that might have helped the Soviets develop their own nuclear weapons. Both he and his wife Ethel would ultimately pay for their activities with their lives.
Rosenberg's wife is also accused of complicity in the plot against the country's security.
The Rosenbergs were both committed communists from a young age. At their trial, it was alleged that Julius had taken an interest in communist ideas in college, while Ethel had joined the Young Communist League as a young woman. Although declassified documents published in 1995 show that Julius was undeniably guilty, it's less clear if Ethel really was a spy. Some people believe that Ethel's brother David Greenglass and his wife Ruth, who were also involved in the spy ring, fabricated evidence against Ethel as part of a plea deal. The Greenglasses cooperated with the authorities and escaped the death sentence, while the Rosenbergs stayed silent and paid with their lives. There was some debate about the justness of the Rosenbergs' sentence, but President Dwight D. Eisenhower, for one, reportedly said, "I can only say that by immeasurably increasing the chances of atomic war, the Rosenbergs may have condemned to death tens of millions of innocent people all over the world." The Cambridge Five were the British equivalent of the Rosenberg spy ring. They were a highly educated group of young men who were drawn to communism in the 1930s and wound up working for the Soviet Union. Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, Donald MacLean, Anthony Blunt, and a fifth man, who was probably John Cairncross, were all recruited by the Soviets while attending Cambridge University. Each member went on to become part of the British establishment in some way, working at the Foreign Office, MI5 and MI6. MacLean in particular passed along valuable American nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union, while the others handed over hundreds of classified documents. Their success is all the more remarkable considering that stolen KGB files provided by a Soviet defector in the 1990s describe both MacLean and Burgess as blabbermouths and heavy drinkers who regularly came close to blowing their covers. The revelation that these men were spies was so embarrassing to Britain that although Burgess and MacLean's activities were uncovered in 1951, the affair was hushed up for many years. Declassified government files reveal that senior officials were concerned that they might not have enough evidence to prosecute the men, and that the revelations could cause a scandal in America. The members of the group were never actually prosecuted, although Blunt eventually lost his knighthood. MacLean, Burgess, and Philby all escaped to the Soviet Union, where they were left undisturbed.
In the end, the Cambridge Five risked it all for a system that today lies in ruins.
Julius Caesar was by no means a saintly figure. A leading populist politician in the Roman Republic, he was declared dictator for life in 44 BC. In response, a group of disgruntled senators stabbed him to death on the Senate floor soon afterward. Among those conspirators were men who claimed to be Caesar's friends and allies. Marcus Junius Brutus is actually cast as the worst of the lot, and for good reason. He was the son of Caesar's mistress, making him almost like a son to Caesar himself. He also had been forgiven by Caesar once before for supporting his enemy Pompey the Great in the recent civil war. According to the ancient historian Suetonius, when Brutus rushed at him, Caesar turned and said, "You too, my child?" And Brutus wasn't the only traitorous conspirator in this plot. Several men in the group had fought alongside Caesar on his campaigns before they killed him. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, for example, had backed Caesar in the Civil War and been raised to prominence by him. When Decimus didn't receive enough attention for his recent victories, he joined the other conspirators and stabbed his friend in the back, or more literally in the ribs.
Let's all cry peace, freedom, and liberty.
Every American schoolchild surely knows the story of Benedict Arnold, the man who betrayed the American revolutionaries to the British, or at least tried to. But before he became a traitor, he distinguished himself as a fine soldier during the American Revolution. He achieved some notable successes, including at Fort Ticonderoga, and he helped outfox the British at Valcour Island. Alas, Arnold felt that he'd been passed over by the High Command and eventually agreed to switch sides to help Great Britain. Leading up to his betrayal, he was summoned to court on a list of petty charges by Patriot Joseph Reed, an ordeal that soured his relationship with the revolutionaries. Some believe Arnold's second wife Peggy Shippen may have also been a deciding factor in his betrayal, as she came from a family with loyalist sympathies. Arnold seems to have been very committed to the revolutionary cause before they met, so his genuine love for her may well have been a strong influence in his decision to switch sides. The British also offered Arnold a lot of money, which he sorely needed to provide for his aristocratic wife.
I am going to betray the United States because I love you.
But Arnold's plot to surrender the fort at West Point failed in spectacularly short order. His middleman John Andre was caught with incriminating papers on his person, and Arnold was forced to make a run for it. He served out the rest of the war as a British officer before retiring to Britain after the war. As a young man, Wang Jingwei was heavily involved in Sun Yat-sen's revolutionary movement that aimed to modernize China and form a republic. Wang even attempted to assassinate one of the last Qing royals, Prince Chun. During the pre-war years, he went on to become a prominent politician. Then, in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War began, and the Japanese seized the cities of Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing. To the horror of many, Wang cooperated with the invaders. The Japanese created a new puppet government in Nanjing, and in 1940, Wang was made the head of that government. He argued that he was only trying to protect the Chinese people, and appeasement seemed like a sensible option against a much stronger Japan. For most Chinese people, Wang's actions would prove to be unforgivable in light of Japanese atrocities in the country. The controversial politician was never held accountable for his treachery and died in 1944 before the end of the war. Following Henry VIII's Reformation, the United Kingdom went through a tumultuous period of religious upheaval. By the time that James I ascended to the throne in 1603, England was truly Protestant, and Catholics had become a persecuted minority. Although some hoped that James would change things, he too cracked down on Catholics, throwing all the priests he could find out of England. Committed Catholic Guy Fawkes was one of a number of men radicalized by this grim state of affairs. Taking matters into his own hands, he wound up embroiled in a plot to blow up James and the Houses of Parliament. After hatching their plan in a pub, the Catholic conspirators placed 36 barrels of gunpowder in the cellars under Parliament. An anonymous letter tipped off the authorities about the plan, and all 13 men were caught or killed. Fawkes was the one caught red-handed, standing around with a packet of matches. For centuries after his betrayal, Fawkes became Britain's punching bag, burned every year at the 5th of November for Bonfire Night, also known as Guy Fawkes Day. Less invested in Catholic plots than in previous centuries, many modern guys are actually effigies of other unpopular figures in Britain. For example, in 2022, short-lived Prime Minister Liz Truss was burned in the town of Edenbridge.
And together we shall give them a 5th of November that shall never, ever be forgot.
Rarely has anybody's reputation taken such a steep nosedive as that of French General Henri-Philippe Pétain. During World War I, he was a decorated commander famous for leading his troops to victory at Verdun. But years later, he collaborated with the Nazis and became head of the Vichy government. At the end of World War II, Pétain was condemned to death as a traitor, but President Charles de Gaulle commuted his sentence. So instead, he lived the remainder of his days on the prison island of Île-d'Yeu, where he is now buried. Some French citizens still admire Pétain, who made excuses after the war for his cooperation with the Nazis. While he was in charge of France, he did secretly support the Allies in some ways. For example, he quietly ordered African French forces to join up with Germany's enemies in North Africa. Some also claim that he did his best to safeguard French Jews under the regime, although in truth, his time in office saw the deportation, imprisonment, and death of thousands of Jewish people. Tense political arguments over Pétain's life are still ongoing in France today. Diarmait Mac Murchada was one of many petty kings to rule over Ireland in the High Medieval period. He inherited the throne of Leinster in a volatile time in Irish history, and he quickly became entangled in a series of deadly power struggles. According to medieval sources, he was known to have killed and/or blinded 17 Irish chiefs, and he once abducted an abbess, killing at least 140 people and burning down her abbey in the process. Mac Murchada was one of several kings who strived to control the coveted city of Dublin, but in 1166 he was overpowered by his enemies and forced to flee. Heading to Aquitaine to speak to the King of England, Henry II, he managed to get several Norman lords involved in his Irish squabble, essentially inviting them to invade Ireland. With the help of Richard, Earl of Pembroke, Mac Murchada reclaimed Dublin, although he died shortly afterward. His personal ambition proved to have enormous repercussions for Ireland, as it sacrificed the nation's sovereignty for centuries to come. Henry II declared his rule over Ireland, and the English would be exceedingly difficult to remove ever after. Judas Iscariot is perhaps the most famous traitor of all time. According to the Bible, he made a pact with the Jewish establishment to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. While loitering in the Garden of Gethsemane in Jerusalem, he kissed Jesus to identify him to the high priests. Following Jesus' crucifixion, Judas was horrified by his actions and hanged himself. Judas has remained a fascinating character throughout the centuries. The Bible doesn't explain his motivations in great detail, though it is hinted that he was greedy, with the Gospel of John referring to him as a thief. Pop culture depictions of Judas have often attempted to flesh out his character and explain his motivations. In the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, for example, he's genuinely concerned that Jesus is a dangerous radical. And the Gnostic Gospel of Judas presents an alternate telling of the story in which Jesus actually asked Judas to betray him so that he can save mankind.